did it. That's the only thing I'm going to say is they fucking did it. The Indiana Fever spent this game looking like came into this game looking like a team that nobody feared, and everybody was like, you know what, we're going to kill this team.
Clark has scored or assisted on 9 of Indiana's 11 points in the quarter, and Clark picked up a foul.
Field goal when Caitlin Clark was on the floor. Caitlin was guarding Rhyne at times. Caitlin was being guarded by Rhyne. And Rhyne Howard just didn't even shoot the ball when Caitlin was on the floor. As soon as Caitlin comes out, Rhyne hits 2 threes. But I got to just talk, first of all, about the Dream, who were poor.
The most dangerous entity in the history of professional sports is a generational prodigy with a score to settle. For an entire week, the national media, the credentialed insiders, and hostile front office executives tried to bury the Indiana Fever. They leaked the most toxic narratives imaginable. They called the franchise savior a diva. They called her a real problem to deal with. They set the stage for the Atlanta Dream to walk into Gainbridge Fieldhouse and deliver the final decisive blow to a season teetering on the edge of absolute collapse. The establishment wanted a funeral. They wanted to permanently validate the archaic coaching system and prove that the rookie was the true problem all along. But instead of a funeral, the basketball world just witnessed a resurrection. What happened next would shake the entire WNBA to its foundation and prove that sometimes, the most powerful response to your haters is simply showing up and dismantling everything they built. Coming into this matchup against Atlanta, the narrative surrounding the Indiana Fever wasn't just negative. It was absolutely catastrophic. Every major outlet had constructed an elaborate narrative designed to paint this franchise as broken beyond repair. The story being sold to the basketball world was simple. The Indiana Fever were finished. Done. A cautionary tale of how mismanagement and toxic locker rooms destroy even the most talented rosters. The Portland Fire had supposedly laid out the perfect tactical blueprint to completely dismantle Stephanie White's squad. Opposing teams believed they had cracked the code. The formula was straightforward. Apply aggressive ball pressure, trap the pick and roll relentlessly, and watch the Fever's poorly designed offensive set self-destruct in real time. Teams across the league were operating under this assumption like it was gospel truth. They were convinced that if they followed this prescription, victory was inevitable. But it went deeper than just basketball strategy. The underlying analytics and shot quality metrics leading into this game suggested that Indiana was statistically destined to lose. The advanced stats didn't lie, the talking heads said. The spreadsheets had spoken. Every computer model, every predictive algorithm, every metric that the modern game had constructed all pointed toward the same conclusion. The Fever simply didn't have what it took to compete at the highest level. The numbers didn't support them. The data rejected them. What made this week particularly brutal was the coordinated assault from multiple fronts simultaneously. The entire league was operating under the assumption that the Fever locker room was a fractured, toxic wasteland. Front office executives weren't even hiding their frustration anymore. Stories leaked about tension between the coaching staff and the star player. Rumors circulated about disrespect and internal conflict. The narrative became so pervasive that even neutral observers started questioning whether this team could function at all. Could they even coexist in the same locker room, or was everything beyond repair? Caitlin Clark's name was dragged through the mud repeatedly. She was labeled a diva, not just once or twice, but constantly, relentlessly, from every angle. The framing was deliberate. A young, talented player who couldn't handle the pressure of professional basketball. A generational talent whose ego was bigger than her actual impact. Someone who was more interested in personal glory than team success. This wasn't just criticism, it was character assassination. Stephanie White's coaching system came under fire too. Years of respect and experience meant nothing anymore. Suddenly, analysts were suggesting she was outdated, incapable of managing modern players, unable to adapt her philosophy to the new generation of athletes. The establishment was ready to tear down everything and start from scratch. The message was clear: this situation was irreparable. The media had spent months constructing this elaborate case against the franchise. They had built walls of evidence, or what they claimed was evidence. Viral sideline moments between Clark and White. Tense press conferences where frustration seeped through every word. Trade rumors that gained traction with each passing day. The digital conversation was dominated by questions about whether this partnership could survive. Would there be a trade? Would one of them demand out? Was the relationship completely destroyed? The establishment was practically salivating at the possibility of a full-scale mutiny on the bench. They wanted vindication. They wanted to prove that they had been right all along. They had already written the ending. The Fever would lose this game to Atlanta. The Dream would deliver the final blow. The season would implode. The roster would be dismantled, and Clark would either be traded away or would demand out herself. This was the narrative they had constructed, and they were fully committed to it. But basketball is not played on spreadsheets, and it is certainly not dictated by leaked front office quotes. From the opening tip of this game against Atlanta, something fundamental shifted. The Indiana Fever had collectively decided to tune out the noise. They walked onto that court with a singular focus: prove everyone wrong. And what happened next would become one of the most important victories in franchise history, not just because of the win itself, but because of what it represented about resilience, character, and the power of responding to adversity with excellence rather than capitulation. The Indiana Fever arrived at Gainbridge Fieldhouse that night looking like a team that nobody feared. Every opposing coach, every analyst, every scout in the league was convinced this would be a mismatch. Atlanta was coming in as the executioner, ready to deliver the final blow to a season that was already on life support. The Dream had built a formidable roster. They had physical players. They had scorers. They had everything they needed to dominate a supposedly fractured Indiana team. But from the opening tip, something was visibly different about the Fever. The energy was different. The focus was different. The intensity was different. It was as if they had heard every single criticism, absorbed every single negative narrative, and decided collectively that tonight was the night to respond. Not with words, not with excuses, but with action. Pure, undeniable action on the basketball court. The defensive intensity, which had been the subject of relentless national mockery, completely transformed. Analysts had spent weeks questioning whether the Fever could even execute a basic defensive scheme. Could they stay disciplined? Could they move together? Could they communicate? These questions suddenly seemed absurd as Indiana stepped onto the court and suffocated Atlanta's offense from the opening possession. The Fever held a highly potent Atlanta Dream offense to an absolutely miserable shooting performance. The Dream shot an abysmal 6 of 21 from beyond the three-point arc. Let that number sink in. 6 of 21. The Atlanta team that came into this game expecting to dominate was completely silenced from distance. Their ball movement looked disjointed. Their spacing was compromised. Their rhythm was non-existent. Elite scorers like Allisha Gray and Rhyne Howard looked completely lost, utterly unable to find a rhythm against a suddenly suffocating Indiana rotation. These weren't role players getting shut down. These were legitimate scoring threats who had been dominant all season. And against this Fever defense, they were invisible. Gray couldn't find her spots. Howard couldn't get comfortable. The entire Atlanta offensive system simply didn't function against what Indiana was doing defensively. The Indiana Fever did not just bounce back from a brutal week of criticism. They delivered a dominant 12-point victory with a final score of 83-71. But this wasn't a close game that came down to the final possession. This wasn't a desperate scramble to get over the finish line. This was a complete dismantling of everything the establishment had predicted. They stepped onto the hardwood, looked directly at the opposition's meticulously crafted blueprint for their destruction, and completely dismantled it in front of the entire basketball world. At the epicenter of this historic, season-saving masterpiece was Caitlin Clark, orchestrating a performance so gritty, so brilliant, and so defiant that it immediately shattered every single fabricated rumor about her character and her commitment to this franchise. The narrative about her being selfish evaporated. The criticism about her defensive effort disappeared. The question marks about her leadership vanished in an instant. What made this victory even more significant was the message it sent to the rest of the league. Indiana wasn't just winning a game, they were sending a statement. They were proving that despite the adversity, despite the criticism, despite the external noise, they had the collective will to execute at the highest level. They had the resilience to respond when everything was against them. The victory validated everything that had been questioned. It proved that Stephanie White's system could work. It proved that Caitlin Clark could lead. It proved that the Fever had championship-level potential despite what the spreadsheets and analytics had suggested. This wasn't just a win. This was a declaration of intent. This was a franchise telling the entire basketball world that they were not done fighting, not done believing, and absolutely not done proving people wrong. The resurrection had begun, and nothing would ever be the same for the Indiana Fever. Before this game, opposing teams thought they had figured out the formula to beat Indiana. The Portland Fire had supposedly laid out the perfect tactical blueprint, and it had spread throughout the league like gospel. Every coach with a clipboard and a whiteboard believed they had cracked the code on how to shut down the Fever. The blueprint was simple, repeatable, and according to everyone, absolutely foolproof. The strategy centered on aggressive ball pressure from the opening possession. Don't give Caitlin Clark any space to operate in the pick and roll. Trap her constantly. Force her into bad decisions. Make her uncomfortable. The theory was that if you could disrupt her rhythm early, the entire Fever offense would fall apart. The supporting cast wasn't good enough to win without her carrying the load. So the plan was to put all the defensive pressure on Clark and watch the system crumble under the weight of it. The second part of the blueprint involved trapping the pick and roll relentlessly. Don't give Indiana's ball handlers any room to make decisions. Collapse the defense. Force turnovers. According to the prevailing wisdom, the Fever's offensive sets were poorly designed and vulnerable to aggressive trapping. A good defensive team with the right game plan could force multiple turnovers and completely dismantle Indiana's offensive flow. It sounded brilliant in theory. But there was a deeper level of pessimism surrounding this team beyond just basketball strategy. The underlying analytics and shot quality metrics leading into this game suggested that Indiana was statistically destined to lose. The advanced stats didn't lie, the experts claimed. Every computer model, every predictive algorithm, every metric that modern basketball had constructed all pointed toward the same conclusion. The Fever simply didn't have what it took to compete. The numbers rejected them. The data predicted their failure. If you looked at the spreadsheets, the conclusion was inevitable. Atlanta was going to win comfortably. The entire league was operating under the assumption that the Fever locker room was a fractured, toxic wasteland. Front office executives had leaked stories about internal conflict. The narrative about Clark being a problem had spread like wildfire. The question wasn't whether Indiana could win, it was whether they could even function as a cohesive unit on the court. How could a team with that much internal strife possibly execute at an elite level? But basketball is not played on spreadsheets, and it is certainly not dictated by leaked front office quotes or expert predictions. From the opening tip against Atlanta, something remarkable happened. The Indiana Fever completely nullified everything the league thought they had figured out. The defensive intensity, which had been mocked relentlessly, suddenly emerged as a weapon. It wasn't just good defense, it was suffocating, overwhelming, relentless defense. The Fever held the Atlanta Dream offense to an absolutely miserable shooting performance. The Dream shot 6 of 21 from three-point range. That's a 28.5% clip from distance. For a team with elite shooters, that's catastrophic. Elite scorers like Allisha Gray and Rhyne Howard looked completely lost against the Indiana rotation. They couldn't find their spots. They couldn't get comfortable. They couldn't establish any rhythm whatsoever. What made this defensive performance truly remarkable was how it completely dismantled the blueprint that had supposedly worked against Indiana. The aggressive ball pressure that was supposed to force turnovers and chaos. It didn't work. The relentless trapping that was supposed to collapse the Fever's offense. It didn't work. Indiana executed their offensive sets with precision and efficiency. They made good decisions. They got clean looks at the basket. The system functioned exactly as it was designed to function. The underlying analytics that had predicted Indiana's failure, they meant nothing. The spreadsheets that had declared Atlanta the clear winner, they were completely irrelevant. This was a visceral, undeniable victory that proved something the numbers couldn't capture. Will, resilience, and collective determination matter more than any algorithm ever could. The Fever had taken everything the league thought they understood about beating them and completely invalidated it in a single night. For months, the national media had spent countless hours dissecting Caitlin Clark's defensive shortcomings. It became part of the standard narrative about her game. Yes, she could score. Yes, she could facilitate. Yes, she had all the offensive weapons in the world. But defensively, that was supposed to be her Achilles heel. Analysts had spent weeks pointing out supposed lapses in effort, mistakes in positioning, and fundamental defensive breakdowns. She was labeled a defensive liability, not once or twice, but constantly, relentlessly, as if it was an indisputable fact. The talking heads had constructed an entire case against her defensive abilities. They showed highlights of her getting beaten off the dribble. They pointed out instances where she was out of position. They questioned her strength relative to other guards in the league. The narrative became so pervasive that even neutral observers started to believe it. Clark's defense was supposed to be the glaring weakness in an otherwise transcendent skill set. It was supposed to be the one area where opponents could exploit her and gain an advantage. But game tape doesn't lie. And when you actually watched Indiana play against Atlanta, something extraordinary became immediately clear. Caitlin Clark didn't just play good defense in this game. She anchored the entire defensive scheme. She was the foundational piece that made everything else work. She was the quarterback of the Fever's suffocating defense, directing traffic, communicating constantly, and executing assignments with precision. The most shocking defensive performance came in the form of Rhyne Howard's complete neutralization. Howard is one of the most lethal wing scorers in the entire WNBA. She's explosive off the dribble. She can shoot from anywhere on the court. She's a legitimate scoring threat that defenses have to respect and prepare for. But when Caitlin Clark was physically matched up against her, something remarkable happened. Howard was completely locked down. She didn't just have a bad shooting night, she failed to even make a single field goal during those critical defensive stretches when Clark was guarding her. Think about that for a moment. An elite scorer, one of the best shooters in the league, went silent against Clark's defense, not because Clark was bigger or stronger, not because she had superior athleticism, but because she was fundamentally sound. She was disciplined. She understood spacing. She moved her feet. She used her length effectively. She stayed attached to Howard and made every single possession difficult. She made the elite scorer feel uncomfortable in ways that most guards in the league simply cannot do. It wasn't until Clark rotated out of the play, until she moved to help on another possession, that Howard finally managed to break loose for a couple of perimeter shots. The data was undeniable. When Clark was on Howard, she was a non-factor. When Clark rotated away, Howard was suddenly able to find some rhythm. The defensive impact was so clear and so obvious that even the most casual observer could see it happening in real time. The media had spent months falsely labeling Clark as a defensive liability. Yet the game tape, the actual evidence of what happened on the basketball court, proved that narrative completely wrong. She didn't just play solid defense. She played elite-level defense. She anchored a defensive scheme that completely erased one of the most dangerous wing scorers in the entire association. She was the defensive anchor that made everything else possible. This revelation had massive implications for the entire narrative around Clark. If she could defend like this, then the entire foundation of the criticism against her collapsed. The talking heads had built their case on the assumption that she was a defensive liability who dragged her team down on that end of the court. But that assumption was false. Demonstrably, undeniably false. What this game proved was that Clark's defensive ability had never been the issue. The issue was the narrative. The issue was that analysts had decided ahead of time what her weaknesses were, and then looked for evidence to support that predetermined conclusion. They weren't evaluating her defense fairly or objectively. They had made up their minds and then simply waited for opportunities to criticize her. This game against Atlanta completely invalidated that entire approach. Clark's defense wasn't a liability. It was a strength. It was a weapon. And the basketball world was about to have to reckon with that reality. The third quarter is often where championships are won or lost. It's the quarter where momentum can shift dramatically, where a team's championship mentality becomes visible, where players reveal their true character under pressure. In this game, the third quarter became the defining moment of the entire season. Atlanta had actually seized a brief lead at 43-42, and for a moment, it seemed like the script that everyone had written might actually come true. Maybe the Fever really were fractured. Maybe the negativity really had taken its toll. Maybe the establishment's narrative was going to be vindicated. But then something remarkable happened. Kelsey Mitchell, the silent warrior of the Indiana franchise, the player who had suffered through losing seasons and inefficient offensive systems for years, suddenly transformed into an unstoppable offensive force. This wasn't just a hot shooting night. This was something more fundamental. This was a player who had finally found her moment, her stage, her opportunity to be great on the biggest stage imaginable. Mitchell had been waiting for this moment her entire career. She had been the dependable veteran while young talent developed around her. She had played in countless games where the offense didn't flow through her. She had accepted a supporting role without complaint. But when Caitlin Clark found her in rhythm, when the offense was built around getting Mitchell clean looks and getting her the ball in her spots, something magical happened. She became unstoppable. The defining moment of the entire season occurred during this miraculous third-quarter run. The game was hanging in the absolute balance. Atlanta had seized a brief 43-42 lead, and the momentum was precariously poised to shift. Everything could have gone either way in that moment. Mitchell secured a massive steal, demonstrating elite-level defensive intensity. She then pushed the tempo on the fast break, and instead of taking the easy high-percentage layup or deferring to a trailing teammate under the basket, she stopped on a dime and drilled a soul-crushing pull-up three-pointer in transition. That shot. That single moment. That was the shot that broke Atlanta's spirit. That was the shot that shifted the entire momentum of the game. That was the shot that Atlanta would be thinking about long after the final buzzer sounded. It was the kind of audacious, momentum-shifting play that completely shatters the spirit of an opposing defense. It was the kind of shot that makes championship teams and breaks teams that are simply trying to survive. Mitchell finished the game with an astonishing +14, ± rating. She was so terrifyingly dominant during that specific stretch that she didn't even need to attempt a single shot in the fourth quarter for the Fever to secure the double-digit victory. Let that sink in. A player can be so impactful, so dominant, so completely in control of the game that she doesn't need to take another shot once her team has seized control. That's the definition of a championship-level performance. What made Mitchell's eruption even more significant was understanding its source. This explosion was not the result of a selfish star hoarding the basketball. This was not the result of a talented player trying to prove something individually. This was the direct result of a point guard who willingly sacrifices her own statistics to feed the hot hand. This was Caitlin Clark demonstrating that she understood the concept of elevation, that greatness lifts everyone in its orbit. Clark was actively looking for Mitchell. She was setting her up. She was getting her the ball in rhythm. She was facilitating the offense in a way that allowed her teammate to reach her highest potential. The undisputed player of the game honors belonged entirely to Kelsey Mitchell, but the architecture of that performance, the foundation upon which it was built, was supported by the unselfish facilitation and brilliant orchestration of number 22. This was the perfect rebuttal to everyone who said Clark was selfish. This was the perfect response to everyone who said she couldn't elevate her teammates. Here was Clark actively engineering the opportunity for Mitchell to be great. Here was a franchise player willing to take a step back so that her teammate could step forward. Here was the exact opposite of the diva narrative that had been constructed around her. This was selflessness. This was leadership. This was greatness in its truest form. While the backcourt was engineering an offensive masterpiece, something equally significant was happening in the paint. The absolute defining physical battle of the night took place in the painted area, and it would prove to be just as important to the final outcome as anything Mitchell or Clark did on the offensive end. The Atlanta Dream had built their entire identity around the physical dominance of Angel Reese. They had constructed their offensive scheme and their entire approach to the game around Reese's ability to dominate in the low post. Reese was supposed to bully her way to the rim. She was supposed to control the offensive glass and grab second chance opportunities. She was supposed to completely intimidate the Indiana frontcourt and assert her physical will on the game. That was the game plan. That was what the Dream had bet their season on. They were counting on Reese to do what she had done all season long, use her strength and physicality to dominate the opposition. But the Dream made a massive miscalculation. They completely forgot about the determination, the resilience, and the competitive fire of Myisha Hines-Allen. In professional basketball, you rarely see an established physical enforcer like Angel Reese get completely overpowered and dominated. Reese has built a reputation for dominating some of the strongest post players in the world, including the legendary Alyssa Thomas. She has gone up against elite post players and come out on top repeatedly. She is known for her ability to impose her will physically on the game, but against the Indiana Fever, the roles were completely reversed. Myisha Hines-Allen stepped onto the floor and completely outplayed Angel Reese in every conceivable way. She anchored her ground, fought through the contact, and established a level of pure, unapologetic physicality that the Dream simply could not match. She was aggressive. She was relentless. She was constantly engaged and fighting for position. She didn't back down from Reese for a single possession. Reese was visibly rattled by the experience. She was heavily contained throughout the game. She was forced to settle for inefficient looks. She couldn't establish the rhythm that she was accustomed to establishing. The usual physical dominance that makes Reese such a dangerous player was completely neutralized. She was ultimately forced to settle for a meaningless double-double in the final garbage time minute of the game, a stat padding exercise that had absolutely no bearing on the final outcome of the contest. The frustration mounted visibly as the game progressed. Reese balled a critical three-point attempt at a pivotal moment in the game. She committed 4 turnovers, many of them the result of trying to force plays and make something happen when Hines-Allen wasn't giving her any space to operate. Her ineffectiveness in the paint, the place where she's supposed to be most dominant, was a massive factor in Atlanta's inability to generate enough offense to keep pace with Indiana. What this physical battle represented was far more significant than just one player outplaying another player. It was proof that the Fever finally had the personnel to match the elite physicality of the league. For years, Indiana had been questioned about their ability to compete with teams that had dominant post players. Could they keep up? Could they match the physicality? Did they have enough strength and size to compete? The answer came in the form of Myisha Hines-Allen's dominant performance. She didn't just play well. She was the most physically dominant player on the court. She made Angel Reese, a player known for her physicality, look small and uncomfortable. She established herself as a force that opponents had to respect and prepare for. She proved that Indiana wasn't just a perimeter-based team that could be bullied inside. Hines-Allen was the undisputed standout of the physical battle. Her tape, her effort, her relentless approach to the game was reminiscent of legendary performances under pressure. She didn't have a historic scoring night. She didn't put up eye-popping numbers. But she did something far more important. She made Reese uncomfortable. She made the Dream's primary offensive weapon ineffective. She anchored the interior defense in a way that prevented Atlanta from generating easy baskets. In a game that was decided by 12 points, that kind of dominant interior play is absolutely invaluable. But the most incredible, awe-inspiring revelation from this historic victory did not emerge until after the final buzzer. It is a detail that elevates Caitlin Clark's performance from simply great to absolutely legendary. It's a story that will be told for years, a moment that defines her character and her commitment to excellence in ways that statistics simply cannot capture. During halftime, out of the view of the national cameras, far away from the broadcast booth and the watching world, Caitlin Clark was physically throwing up. Whether she was battling a severe illness or a sudden wave of physical exhaustion, her body was actively breaking down. Her physical system was rejecting the demands being placed on it. She was sick. She was struggling. She was barely functioning physically. In that moment, there were 1,000 reasons for her to take the rest of the game off. The critics, the executives, and the haters wanted exactly that. They wanted her to stay in the locker room. They wanted her to protect herself. They wanted ammunition to prove their narrative about her being a diva. They wanted to say, see, when things got tough, when she wasn't feeling well, she quit. She protected her own interests instead of fighting for her team. A lesser player would have stayed in the locker room. A player without championship mentality would have found reasons to sit out the second half. A player focused on personal statistics would have demanded the night off to protect her own efficiency numbers. And frankly, a diva, the exact term that the front office had used to describe her, would have demanded special treatment. A diva would have said, "I'm not feeling well, I need to sit this one out." Instead, Caitlin Clark wiped her face, walked out of the tunnel, and prepared to deliver the absolute best defensive performance of her entire professional career. Not her best offensive performance, not her best facilitating performance, her best defensive performance. In a game where she was physically compromised, where her body was working against her, she decided to anchor herself on the end of the floor where effort and will matter most. She was flying around the court with reckless abandon. She was the first player back in transition defense, sprinting to stop the break every single time. She was the first player pushing the tempo on the offensive end, demanding the ball and demanding more from herself and her teammates. She was actively hunting Angel Reese on defensive switches, making conscious decisions to go up against the most physical player on the Atlanta roster, holding her ground despite being a massive physical mismatch. She played through the illness. She played through the relentless contact from the Atlanta guards who were testing her physically. She played through an incredibly hostile whistle that saw her earn a fraction of the free throws she actually deserved. Referees weren't giving her calls. She was being beaten up. She wasn't getting the benefit of the doubt. And she played through all of it without complaint, without excuse, without asking for sympathy. Her shooting numbers, 6 of 17 from the floor, will be heavily criticized by the box score watchers who fundamentally do not understand the game of basketball. People will look at that shooting percentage and say she had a bad game. They will point to it as evidence of offensive inefficiency. They will use it to suggest that she didn't have an impact on the game. But the true students of the game saw something entirely different when they watched the tape. They saw a maestro at work. She utilized an unguardable one-legged mid-range floater to outplay Rhyne Howard in isolation. She methodically broke down Jordan Canada off the dribble, creating advantages and forcing the defense to scramble. She threw brilliant, perfectly timed passes that forced the defense into foul trouble, generating invisible assists that do not show up in the standard box score. She ran the offense with intelligence and purpose. She made winning plays constantly. If her actual shots had fallen at her standard career rate, if she had shot her normal percentage from the field and from three, this would have been a historic 50-point blowout. The game would not have been competitive in any way whatsoever. But that's not how basketball works. Sometimes great players have nights where their shots don't fall. Sometimes great players don't need their shots to fall to have legendary performances. Sometimes greatness reveals itself in ways that transcend statistics. This was one of those nights. This was a performance where a generational talent proved that she was far more than just an offensive player. She could dominate a game on the defensive end. She could will her team to victory through effort and intelligence. She could play through adversity and deliver exactly what her team needed at exactly the moment they needed it. For the past 72 hours leading up to this game, the sports world had been consumed with one question. Could Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White actually work together? The narrative that had dominated the national conversation suggested that their relationship was completely irreparable. Everything pointed toward disaster. Everything suggested that this partnership was dead. The viral sideline arguments had been replayed countless times across social media. People had dissected every moment, every facial expression, every gesture that suggested tension between the coach and her star player. The tense press conferences, where frustration seemed to seep through every word, had been analyzed exhaustively. Reporters had asked pointed questions designed to highlight the rift. The media had done everything in their power to suggest that these two people had fundamentally incompatible approaches to the game and to coaching. The rumors of an impending trade dominated the digital conversation. Insiders were leaking information about potential deals. Teams were supposedly calling the Fever front office, inquiring about Clark's availability. The suggestion was that management might actually be considering moving their star player if the situation continued to deteriorate. The relationship between Clark and White was supposed to be poison. It was supposed to be toxic beyond repair. The establishment was practically praying for a full-scale mutiny on the bench. They wanted confrontation. They wanted public conflict. They wanted vindication for everything they had written about the supposed dysfunction within the organization. If White and Clark had fought on the sideline, if there had been visible tension, if there had been evidence of a breakdown, the narrative would have been completely validated. The talking heads would have looked like geniuses. The front office insiders would have been proven right. But winning is the ultimate cure for toxicity. There is no better remedy for relationship strain than success. There is no better way to heal tension than to accomplish something together that seemed impossible just moments before. Victory creates bonds that adversity tests but never actually breaks. Success forces people to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about each other and about their partnership. This victory against Atlanta proved that White and Clark didn't just coexist, they thrived together. They were on the same page. They were aligned in their vision and their approach. They understood each other's strengths and compensated for each other's weaknesses. The coach got the best out of her star player. The star player responded to her coach's system and her coach's leadership. They had what championship teams have: alignment. The hug that broke the internet moment would become iconic. It wasn't just a hug. It was a symbol of everything that had been overcome in a single night. It was validation that the relationship was not just functional, but actually strong. It was proof that all of the narratives about irreparable damage were completely false. It was a public declaration that these two people were committed to each other and to winning together. What this victory and this moment signified was far more significant than just one game. It signified that the Indiana Fever were not just a team struggling to find their identity. It signified that they had the resilience to overcome adversity. It signified that they had championship-level potential. It signified that the negative narratives that had been constructed about them were not destiny. They were just stories that could be rewritten with enough determination and excellence. Caitlin Clark had made the establishment wrong about everything. She wasn't a diva. She wasn't a distraction. She wasn't a problem to deal with. She was a generational talent who could dominate on both ends of the floor. She was a leader who lifted her teammates. She was a person of character who could play through adversity and deliver when it mattered most. The prodigy didn't just silence the haters. She made herself untouchable. She created a narrative that no amount of criticism or negativity could penetrate. She proved that sometimes the best response to those who doubt you is not words, but excellence. Not excuses, but execution. Not reaction, but dominance. The basketball world would never look at her the same way again. The establishment would have to completely recalibrate their understanding of who she was and what she was capable of. The resurrection of the Indiana Fever had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. This wasn't just a game. This was a moment where everything shifted. The Indiana Fever walked onto that court facing the narrative of their demise, and they chose to rewrite it with every possession. Caitlin Clark proved that character isn't measured in statistics, it's measured in will. Playing sick, playing through hostility, playing with purpose when your body is fighting against you, that's the definition of championship mentality. Stephanie White was validated. Her system works. Her leadership is sound. Her vision for this team is intact. The veteran Kelsey Mitchell erupted because she believed in her team again. Myisha Hines-Allen established herself as the physical anchor the Fever needed. And the establishment? They watched everything they predicted get dismantled in real time. The most dangerous force in sports isn't a generational talent, it's a generational talent with something to prove. The Fever didn't just beat Atlanta. They sent a message to the entire league: count them out at your own risk. The resurrection is here, and it's only going to get worse for everyone who chose to doubt them.